Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 107, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
And me, Ravi Abbott.
Now, we've been doing this podcast every week for over 2 years now, which kind of still blows my mind a little bit. But, I do meet people now and then, and like I mentioned, I do a podcast to them. And the one thing they always ask is like, well, what's your show about then? And I kind of summarize it that this podcast is all about the history of video games.
Yeah, that's what I think. The history and invention and creation of video games. Yeah.
And charting the story as well, because you think, mainstream kind of gaming has been going now for about 40 years?
Well, yeah, 40 years. And I like to say that actually we're the backstage of video gaming because, you see a lot of the stuff out there in public and we try and tell the stories from behind the scenes.
Yeah. And a lot of it was, because I know obviously in this day and age we've got stuff like Twitter and Facebook, you're a bit more connected with the people that were behind these games and the stories, but back then, when you were a kid, you'd read about it in magazines and stuff, but...
there'd be these heroes on the front cover.
Yeah.
You'd just see these names like Rob Hubbard and you'd just be, oh my God,
they were like rock stars, weren't they?
Yeah.
You thought in your mind you had about as much chance as talking to Rob Hubbard as you did Madonna or someone. It's no chance at all. But now, because we've been doing this show, we're getting to talk to all our heroes week in, week out. And it's funny you mentioned Rob Hubbard because we were hanging out with him last weekend.
Oh, yeah. And, we did fail to record stuff at the beginning, but now we're actually capturing these things quite well. So we're going to bring you an amazing talk today. It's with Rob Hubbard, David Wise and Graeme Norgate.
Now, we recorded this at the All Your Bass Festival in Nottingham, which was, it was on last weekend, first of its kind as well. And this was an entire weekend, 2 days, dedicated to video game music.
Oh, it's amazing. All the signatures on my computer, I managed to get 10 more. It's just completely ran the amount of people that were there.
Yeah.
Just famous stars. Oh, my God.
And we went along on the Saturday morning. David Wise was doing a live performance of the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack, which was great, sitting there watching him playing it live. Then after that, we brought everyone upstairs. It was a bit like being at school, wasn't it, right? Everyone come on, move into the next class. Everyone followed us upstairs. We had this little panel set up and we recorded the whole thing and it was just so interesting. Especially because these three guys are kind of from different generations in terms of, the games they worked on. Rob, obviously, massive on the 8-bit scene. He did stuff later on the Super Nintendo and that kind of thing. David Wise and Graeme Norgate, obviously Rare, and they were known for Goldeneye, Time Splitters they worked on as well.
But also, David Wise was doing a lot of Donkey Kong stuff as well, and he was kind of in that Nintendo department, which, he talks about how excited he was to get MIDI when everyone else was rocking CD audio. So they were all in their own little worlds as well, So
it's interesting to get the story, pretty much from the N64 to the Commodore 64 off like we did this week. So we're going to bring you that live on the Retro Hour podcast, a live recording from All Your Bass Festival coming up in around 25 minutes from now. Definitely worth hanging around for that. Now, we've got to give a shout to our good friend Adam Spring, who he does a podcast called Remotely Interested. And his podcast, we talk about stuff we cover. He covers way more things than we do.
Oh, yeah. If you want to get deep, then Adam's podcast, he has guys that do laser scanning. He has architects on there. He's had some guys from AutoCAD on there.
Yeah.
But he's also got some guys that we really like as well, which is Kim Justice he had on there.
Yeah.
And he's just got AVGN, Angry Video Game Nerd.
So James Rolfe is on the current episode, and because we'd love to get James on our show, and I'm sure it will happen one day. But he said he's been working on getting James on his show for 2 years.
Oh yeah, and James is amazing because he's done a Cinemassacre as well, which is a kind of celebration of films and the background of films as well. It's not just video games he's interested in.
And I think that is one of the big appeals for me of his channel. I love the James and Mike Mondays they do. The sit down just play games. AVGN, that was kind of anyone that watches YouTube into retro gaming.
Best video I liked, sorry to interrupt, but the best video I liked was when he went to Back to the Future locations.
Yeah.
And then showed them and then showed the film. That was cool.
But I think, anyone that watches retro gamers on YouTube, we all started with AVGN.
Yeah.
He's always the first one that we all watched. But then, like you said, I love his videos about movies and stuff, and the monster movies he does from the 50s. And a really interesting guy. And there was a bit of controversy last year when he did that, I won't be watching the new female Ghostbusters film. Yeah. He was even in the papers and all that, people calling him misogynistic and all that. Unless you watch the video, then you understand his reasoning.
Yeah.
But
he's a major Ghostbusters fanboy. That was
as am I. You know, I always have been. So I did go and see the film. Wish I never did in the end, if I'm honest. But AVGN, I mean, what a legend. And if you want to check out this interview, I mean, Adam's podcast is really worth a listen.
Yeah.
And we're very good friends with Adam. So do check that out. It's called Remotely Interested, and we'll put a link in this week's show notes at theretrohour.com. If you're having a bit of a surf around our website today, I mean, there is a little button that you might spot in the corner of the website that is completely optional to click on, but we'd appreciate it if you did.
Yeah, you can always, donate, and we accept donations in kind of every currency because you could put it into PayPal, but also on the Ethereum network and Bitcoin.
Yeah, so if you're into cryptocurrencies, we do them. Or, like you said, I mean, there is a PayPal button on there. You put in your local, you can put euros, dollars, anything in there really, can't you? And it converts it.
Anything.
Yeah, so if you like to make a donation at the show, as much or as little as you like, anything will qualify your place in the Hall of Fame, and obviously all goes back into the running of the Retro Hour podcast. And let's just keep doing the show every week, because it takes a lot of time. We have a lot of costs doing the show.
It's going to be like, this is Retro Hour episode 999.
But only if the donations keep us going that long. So if you want to make a donation, all you got to do is click onto our website, theretrohour.com. This week, finding their place in the Hall of Fame. Thank you for your donation, Matthew Martin,
Adrian Olone,
Bart Pellens,
and Jonathan Kay,
who all made donations this week. You can do the same and find your place in the Hall of Fame. We'll give you mention in the future episode of the Retro Hour podcast. Head on to our website, theretrohour.com. Right then, should we do some news stories?
Yeah, totally.
Now, you know that I'm a big fan of the Nintendo Switch.
Oh, yeah, definitely. This is why I put this story in here.
I'd be honest with you, I think the Nintendo Switch is up there my favourite consoles ever. And I play it more than anything else at the moment. Just because it's a system I can take. I went to Bet last week in London, took my Nintendo Switch there, playing it on the train on the way down, been able to play like proper games.
Yeah.
Anyway, you go in the hotel room on the night, it was awesome. But apparently there is some big Nintendo Switch news this week.
Yeah, so it's really hard to jailbreak or have any kind of non-Nintendo software running on there.
Yeah.
A group called Team Executor, who are the bad boys, they basically have done the previous emulators on the 3DS.
Yeah.
And on the Wii U hacks as well.
Did they hack the Wii U?
Yes.
Okay, right. Which was a good hack.
Well, there was a good one, and then the update killed it. Now, what they've said is they've got a future-proof hack. So this means anything that Nintendo put out will not remove this
modification they've done then.
Yeah.
So this is for the Nintendo Switch.
Yes, and it's not going to be affected by an update. So this Switch then opens up options for you to have stuff on the Switch. And they're saying there's a new emulator that's going to come out. And it's from Yuzu. And Yuzu was a previous emulator.
Yeah, I've heard of that. What was that for?
That was for the 3DS.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, I mean, with this, they do say this kind of modification will probably open the door to mass market piracy, allow you to run copy games and stuff on there, which, some people, I'm sure, will take advantage of. I'm looking at this and, I know you hacked your Wii U.
Yeah.
I'm a bit torn on this. I think morally, there is a bit of a difference between hacking a system that's kind of been abandoned and dead, like the Wii U.
Yeah, and the new one.
Yeah, or one that's kind of ascending still.
It's really strange as well, because I know they say this emulator will do everything you need it to do. So it'll probably play all the old stuff and the new stuff. But I find it really weird that people are making emulators for modern consoles. So there's Switch emulators coming out on the PC.
Yeah. Well, they did that with the Wii U as well, didn't they?
Yeah. It's really odd, that is. Yeah, it's strange. I find there's cool features, though. So, there's the PlayStation 2 emulator. Yeah. And that actually adds anti-aliasing, adds extra effects that weren't available on the original games to them and upgrades them. So,
they look a lot better, actually.
God of War can look HD, you know, and yeah.
See, I think with the Switch hack, I'm kind of in two minds about it because I love the system and I don't want all the games to suddenly get pirated and all the third-party developers leave it.
Yeah.
That would be the worst-case scenario. On the flip side, I would love to have a little portable system that runs all the ROMs and all the old classics and
I just
emulators.
love to watch videos on it or YouTube, even if people have different applications. So there was one for the Wii U, which was kind of a drawing program. And I just used that. I didn't have my drawing program on the Nintendo one, so I just used the cracked version. So it all depends what you want to use it for. But I think it's kind of positive news for homebrewers and modders.
Maybe, and pirates as well, probably. But I think it's pretty amazing that they've hacked the Switch already, because the Xbox One still hasn't been cracked.
Yeah.
I think there is like a jailbreak doing the rounds that's kind of very flaky for the PS4. The fact the Switch hasn't been out a year yet and they've already hacked it.
Yeah, and the fact that, you're going to be able to get all the old emulators is just going to be amazing.
Well, what would be kind of shocking is if they they're saying this is going to be out in the spring. Because I know Nintendo, from the rumours I've seen, are working on the Virtual Console to let you play SNES and NES games on it.
If this beats it to market at the same time.
If this beats it to market, then that's taking Nintendo's face, isn't it? But, it's like Jurassic Park, isn't it? Life will find a way. It's like the will. Now, a classic game that we'd all like to see, because can you believe it's actually been the 20th anniversary of Resident Evil 2?
I absolutely love that game. It's one of the titles for my PlayStation.
PS1 classic.
Oh, scared the hell out of me, but it was just so good. Those dogs, when they come to you,
Well, I mean, you think the original Resident Evil games, they were the franchise that really set off survival horror games.
Totally, and it was all the little atmosphere. So, like, the scene changes between it. You wouldn't just have a blank screen. You'd have a door that would go. Just little moves like that.
Because I played stuff like Alone in the Dark and that before it, but Resi was really the first game that made me like.
Other than that, Silent Hill, my heart stopped on that game. But Resi was up there.
And I remember, me and my brother playing that would have all the lights off and stuff. Popcorn on the go, like big glass of Coke, and playing that till 3 a.m. You know what I mean? Very good game. But obviously, people want to go back to Spencer Mansion. 20 years later.
Of course they do.
And this has been, do you remember, it must have been about, 3 years ago now? They announced they were actually doing an HD kind of update of Resident Evil 2. Capcom announced it.
To be honest, I thought it had already been done and released and we'd missed it, because that was ages ago, wasn't it?
Well, they've done kind of the updated packs and stuff, haven't they, with improved graphics and all that. But there has been, apparently they were working on a project to do a full remake of Resident Evil 2. They got about 70% of the way through, and apparently the production team thought it's not working, so they scrapped it.
Oh, wow. Okay, wow.
So that's the thing. It really is something the fans have been dying for, and it's like the fact that now it's the 20th anniversary, it would be a really good time for that game to come out. And as it turns out, I'm probably going to completely mince his pronunciation here, but Hideki Kamiya, who was the original developer of Resident Evil 2, on the anniversary, which was last weekend of Resident Evil 2, the 20th anniversary, loads of people were flooding him on Twitter with requests of is it going to be coming out again then? Is the game getting remade? Are you involved in it? Turns out, he's not involved in it at all, but he said he's heard that his friend is directing a Resident Evil 2 remake. Let's trust him and wait for new information. It's a kind of confirmation that it is going on still.
It's still going on, yeah, and it sounds like he's got a bit of passion behind the project as well, being the original dude. He wants to, see it happen.
Yeah, well, he said
happen well.
He said he went drinking with the guy who's remaking it last year and told him, do it the way you want. So he's kind of handed over the bat and said, look, I'll trust you to do this. But there are rumours that we are going to see that this year. So
Oh, exciting stuff.
Halloween, it could be a good time to release that, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
When you love to play that on Halloween night. Over the glow of your pumpkin. Now, there was a movie that I saw recently. Got to give a big shout to Stephen Fletcher here. The Commodore Story.
Ah, yes, I've still not seen it yet because I missed the bloody train and I was running at the train station.
Randy.
It was going chug, 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 just going off. And it wasn't steam, but it's diesel in Nottingham because they're cheap.
In your mind. So this, I went to see this in London. It was actually the day after my birthday, back in December. Samantha came with me. And we'd had a night before, must admit, probably got in about 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Went to Ronnie Scott's Jazz Bar in Soho.
Nice, yeah.
Very nice, sitting there with drinking cocktails till about 4 in the morning. And then next day, we went slightly hungover, I've got to admit, to watch the Commodore Story. And it was at a place called the Genesis Theatre.
Yeah, it's
There's irony.
Preview, yeah.
And there was a massive turnout. We packed the cinema out. Loads of Commodore and Amiga fans all there watching this film. And I've got to say, I love a lot of the Commodore movies that have come out over the last couple of years. Obviously, we had Viva Amiga. That was really good. We had Bedrooms to Billions, the Amiga years. Again, another great movie. But this one...
The Commodore Wars as well. There was that one as well, yeah.
Well, this one, was really... It was Steve's kind of personal story. He wanted to get the story behind the people, not necessarily the machines. And he went to visit Leonard Tramiel, Jack Tramiel's son, and got some stories that I'd never heard before, about Jack's personal life and how growing up affected him and just what it was like to be the son of a guy who invented one of the biggest computer companies in the world. And it's about 2 hours long, and they get some great stories in there. Bill Hurd's in there, who's always hilarious.
Yeah.
Dave Haney telling his story, in his back garden, sitting there, just reminiscing and stuff. So it's a great film. And now I've seen, there is some news about this. I think it's going to be on Netflix, I've seen.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I saw someone talking about that the other day.
Oh, nice. Because I've noticed that they've got a kind of pledge on the Kickstarter to get the film.
Yeah.
And it's really reasonable. It's £10 per copy of the movie. Or you can get a digital ebook version as well. They have extra stuff like Commodore cassette T-shirts. They have these little Commodore playing cards as well. And, it's all different scales of pledging. But I think £10 is a really good price.
So that's to own it?
Yeah, for a digital download, yeah.
Yeah, or, I'm looking here at the end of this article, so it has been confirmed. It is going to be on Netflix, Amazon Video and iTunes on February 23rd.
Oh, wow, that's great that it's going to be on Netflix. We're going to be on Netflix, Dan.
Yeah, God, yeah, I'm in that film, aren't I? So, yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
There you go. I have to get my little page made on IMDb this afternoon, then, won't I? So it's definitely worthwhile watching. Even, my missus sat through it and she cares nothing about computers or Commodore.
She's probably, she, out of everyone, she probably wants to hear the least of it. She's heard it all her life.
Especially the stuff she was saying, like I said, from Lennon and all that at the beginning.
Yeah.
So it is a movie that I think you can introduce anyone to the subject to, and they'll enjoy it just from watching the people behind the passionate project.
Totally.
So it's definitely worth a watch, and we'll put that the link to it in this week's show notes at theretrohour.com. If you're looking for good stuff to watch as well, now tell us about this Goldeneye mockumentary.
Oh, this looks so funny. So, they had the King of Kong, which was the Donkey Kong. Well, they're making a fake one, which is going to be the British equivalent, which is called Going for Goldeneye, like going for gold. Yeah.
Right, okay.
And it's basically a fictional mockumentary, which is about the world's Goldeneye 007 champions, like in their heyday, when Goldeneye was the top game. And they're deluded, cringe-inciting elite Goldeneye players who wonder why the world no longer cares about their beloved game.
Good question.
Yeah, and they're kind of got the original Goldeneye development team involved with this film.
Right.
And they've got really good feedback. So, probably David Doak and all of those guys might be involved with it. And it's going to be coming out in Blu-ray and DVD and video on demand.
So there's a little trailer here on the website.
Yeah, play a bit of it.
Play a little bit of this, shall we?
When it comes to pure competition, nothing compares to the GoldenEye World Championships.
4 players all on one screen.
The way competitive games are meant to be played. None of this online gaming bollocks.
I can't think of any other athlete who's been on top of their game for almost 2 decades.
Ethan, the 19-time champion, is my hero.
He's a brand, a franchise. The power, the integrity, the skill.
Being a 19-time world champion means 19 people have faced me and 19 have failed.
This actually does look quite funny. It reminds me a bit, the filming style of it. It reminds me of Shaun of the Dead, actually.
Yeah, they've kind of gone for the Shaun of the Dead, a Spinal Tap, kind of just taking a Mickey style. Yeah.
Yeah, but I just think what a great idea for an indie movie. And obviously, these guys love the game. And
I think they've seen other movies like King of Kong and stuff and how serious they are, and they kind of just want to. Yeah.
Should be good for a giggle, I think.
Oh, totally.
Now, if you're going to play GoldenEye on your N64 back in the day, obviously you'd use that controller that's kind of infamous.
Yeah, with the weird kind of 3 prongs, wasn't it? So I remember people used to shoot with it. I don't know.
Hold it like a gun?
Yeah, but there are a few games that you could shoot with it.
That really springy analog stick in the middle on the N64 controller.
Yeah.
Obviously, the one thing that kind of peed us all off a bit back then. The N64 wasn't as bad because it did have quite a long cable. But you remember your mum would always say to you, don't sit too close to the TV, you'll ruin your eyes. But you had to back then because the wires were so short. Now, there is a new version of the N64 controller that apparently is every 90s kid's dream.
Yeah, and this is kind of aimed at emulators. So you can connect it on your PC.
Yeah.
It's Bluetooth, and they're saying it's great for Project 64 and all of these unofficial emulators, but it looks exactly the same, like really, really close to it.
That's the thing, because I always find, I'll be honest with you, I'm not a fan of that controller.
No.
Never liked it. And because I never had an N64 when I was growing up. I always drooled over it.
I liked it with the rumble pack. It's so heavy. And it was like, boom, boom. Yeah.
It did a lot of add-ons and accessories for it, didn't it? But, the only game that controller was designed for Mario 64, wasn't it?
I think so. I heard it was Goldeneye, or it was no for one of the first-person shooters. There was lots of rumours when it came out.
Well, Mario 64 was one of the launch games, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I'd read that was a reason that controller's designed specifically for that game.
Okay.
But then it meant that every other kind of game genre had to kind of shoehorn its controls into it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a natural fit. I mean, I think obviously the nostalgia is very strong for that controller, but I don't find it very comfortable to use a lot of the time. But if you are going to play those games on an emulator, it is obviously a lot better using the original controller than it is trying to use a keyboard or something.
Yeah, that's it. And, this one's really reasonably priced. It's like $34, which, in pounds is going to be even cheaper. Exactly the same, but in pounds.
Probably at the moment, yeah. But again, it's like, what I think they should do, though, is, you said this is for emulators, can't they make a little Bluetooth dongle that you put in the front of the N64 and get to use?
I don't know. You've got to invent it, Dan, and you'll get the gap in the market, and then suddenly
just give it away, mate.
Be a millionaire. Yeah.
I haven't got the skills or talent to make that. Who am I kidding?
Might even be able to put a Raspberry Pi Zero and get that to do the interfacing.
You just want to shove a Raspberry Pi in everything, really. Stop putting Raspberry Pis in everything. So if you want to find out more about that, if you do like emulation, but again, you could probably get that working with the Raspberry Pi, because you can get a Bluetooth dongle for the Raspberry Pi, can't you? So there you go. There's a use for your Raspberry Pi. So if you want to find out more, it will be in this week's show notes at theretrohour.com. Right, guys, thank you for checking out episode number 107 of the Retro Hour podcast. Don't forget, Play Expo Blackpool is coming up very soon. You can book your tickets if you haven't already. We've got some amazing panels we're going to be doing over the weekend. There'll be retro gaming, trading markets there as well.
Free-to-play arcades.
Hundreds of free-to-play arcades. And, of course, we'll be at the bar all night as well. Blackpool drinks. What you save in kind of, the cheap ticket prices this time of year in the hotels, the bar as well is like about that price.
I might do a little video show report for the people who aren't there, who have missed out. I think we should start doing that. Little show reports.
I'm sure I did do one like last year.
Yeah,
in Manchester or something, but yeah. But you're just going to make people jealous who can't make it then, really.
Oh no, it's just more reason to come next time.
Well, actually, I think there'll be a lot of video reports this time, considering we've got 5 of the biggest British YouTubers there, you know what I mean? It should be well covered on YouTube, I imagine.
Yeah, I'll just compile all their clips and just do no filming myself.
So we are going to be there February 10th and 11th. If you want to come down, get your tickets sorted right now. You can get those on our website, theretrohour.com. Now, recorded live at All Your Bass Festival, another event that we were at recently. This is one of my favourite panels that we've done in a long time.
Oh, yeah, this was from Confetti and the National Video Games Arcade, and also Sumo Digital.
Such a good chat. Now, we're going to talk about video game music. Rob Hubbard, David Wise, and Graeme Norgate. If you're going to talk about video game music, I think these are the right guys for the job.
Totally.
So enjoy this, and we'll see you next week.
Ciao.
I'm sure you two gentlemen need no introduction, but I will let you do that. Introduce yourself, please, and tell us what you're famous for.
Okay, I'm Graeme Norgate, and I expect I'm famous for Goldeneye.
I'm Rob Hubbard. I did a lot of stuff in the 80s on C64, and then I did a lot of stuff on Sega Genesis and PC, a few Amiga things, PlayStation, 3DO.
Quite a varied bunch of systems there. Yeah.
And David Wise is going to join us. He's just packing up his stuff at the moment.
Yeah, it should be up in a bit. So it's always quite good to find out, everyone kind of remembers the first system they got and where they got started. So, Graeme, where did it all start for you? What was the first system you got, and what kind of stuff were you doing on that machine when you first got it? And why did you get a computer?
Well, the first system I actually got was the Atari VCS, the 2600. Not very well known for its glorious sound, but that's sort of got me into the bug of computer games. And then really it was this chap here that got me into the path I was doing. I think it was, pretty sure the first piece of music I heard was Monty on the Run, and I thought, how can a computer do that? That was incredible. And from then it was like, well, I like playing computer games and I really like music on the computer, so that was my then goal from about 12. That's what I'm going to do, and I don't know what I'd be doing if I hadn't heard that tune all those years ago. Not really. I better not think about it.
So Rob changed your life, really?
Yes, he did. I'm quite nervous to be sat next to the guy, actually.
So which system did you get first then to start composing music on then? When did that start for you?
So didn't get very far on the Commodore because you had to know machine code really to get anything decent out of it, and I couldn't wrap my head around that. So it was the Amiga 500 and a piece of software called Soundtracker. It's a little 4-channel sample-based tracking program, and I just spent the sort of 16, 17, 18 just learning how to write music on that. None of those will ever see the light of day, hopefully. Yeah, that was my first sort of the first thing that enabled me to make music, and it snowballed from there.
And what about you, Rob?
What was the question?
Yeah, where did it start? What was the first machine you composed on?
Well, the first machine that I actually had was a C64. There wasn't any machine before that, so that was really the first machine that I had. It was a choice between a Memo Tech or... Actually, no, that's not true. I did have a machine before that because there was the ZX80.
Yeah.
With the one with the little touch things.
That chiclet keyboard thing.
Yeah. And there was a bit of a black market thing with those things where, people would just, do you want one for 50 pence or something, So I actually did have one of those ZX80, but the keyboard never worked, did it?
No, you had to really bash down on the keys.
Yeah, you had to really bash down on the keys to get anything, and of course the thing never really worked properly, did it?
And not a famous machine for music, really, was it?
No. So I had that for about maybe half a second before it went in the bin. And then there was things like the Memo Tech and a few other weird machines that I was considering. And then C64 came on the market with the elephant memory. So that was the one that I decided to buy.
And how did you start making music on the 64 then? What was the process of learning that? Or teaching yourself, I guess?
No, in the early days it was, you used to get all these computer magazines that had listings of, basic thing, and then at the end of the article there'd be a whole lot of put and data statements that you had to type in, and they never ever worked.
After you typed in about 20 pages?
Yeah, you type in about
Syntax
20 pages from the magazine, and then nothing happens, it just crashes or something, So, you get the manual and the Commodore manual and look up the registers and all that kind of thing, and then start poking around yourself, Eventually got something working in BASIC, which was just, sounded like a dyslexic musician in terms of rhythm, because you couldn't get anything rhythmically to work in time because the BASIC was so slow. So then you had to learn machine code, and there was a book called Dr. Watson's Assembler or Machine Code or something, which had didn't have the proper mnemonics for 6502. So, but anyway, it got you into learning hexadecimal, binary, and all that, and that really, it wasn't too difficult to learn that stuff, I got a pretty strong math background. So, it came quite easily. And once you figure out, how interrupts work, then it's plain sailing.
So, who were you listening to? Which musicians influenced you musically? It could be outside of video games.
At the time, I was a bit of a classical geek, so I'd listen to Gershwin and Beethoven and stuff like that, mostly because I was doing it at school. I wasn't really into pop music until I think so. It was classical music, and then I was just listening to synth music. So I'd buy the games they were probably $1.99 or something, the Mastertronic games and stuff, because you knew that Rob had done the music or Martin Galway had done it. I didn't know he did Ocean, but you knew the composer of the game because you'd read it in Zap 64 or something, go down the shop and spend your paper round money on it, and I'd make tapes out of that. I'm that nerdy. And so that's kind of what I was listening to as I was growing up.
And you, Rob?
Well, my musical background covers the whole spectrum of stuff, really. So I started, as a little kid learning classical piano, and there's certain things that just stay with you, I've always loved Chopin. Then, you know, I like a lot of classical music. And then later on I got into a lot of jazz, started playing a lot of jazz. So people, Chick Corea and, you know, Michael Brecker and Herbie Hancock and all those sort of players, you know. And then, of course, you know, during the 80s, there was the whole kind of synth pop thing going on, and people like Jean-Michel Jarre and the New Romantics, they were called, you know, which was Human League and
Cabaret.
Yeah. There was a fantastic album of the remix of the Human League album.
Reproduction, was it?
I
can't remember what it was.
Dancing, wasn't it?
There was a remix album of the thing. Yeah, is that what it was?
It was a remix of Dare, I think, and it was called Love and Dancing.
Yeah, which was really, really, you know, kind of cool stuff, and it was people were like hooking up, you know, synths with control voltage triggers. So, you know, I was kind of into all that as well.
So, big spectrum then, definitely.
Yeah. And I got because I was still working as a musician, I had to keep up to date with what was going on in the pop world, with, you know, and, you know, I had to transcribe and arrange a lot of pop music as well, was part of what I was doing, you know.
What about the first games you actually got released then, soundtracks you worked on of, like, you know, for the first games? So what about you, Graham? What was the first project that you did commercially then, and how did you get into it?
Well, stick around and I'll be able to bore you with the details. But the first game was when I worked at Rare. It was Killer Instinct. It was an arcade coin-op game. And I thought, well, this is brilliant, because at the time there was not very many restrictions, and you could just, you know, do your tunes and get them on there. That was kind of like an easy route in, and then I found out that actually no, consoles are quite a lot harder to work on. But it was those early 90s games at Rare. I did some sort of work on the Amiga late 80s for Hewson Consultants, I think they were called, but it didn't really go anywhere, so it was like a one-off. And then it wasn't until I'd badgered Rare enough and they'd said, oh, go on then, we'll give you a job, that things started taking off.
What was the process of, like, applying for it then? Did you send discs in the post, or?
It was an advert in the back of Edge magazine, just saying they were looking for musicians, and I didn't really think anything of it. I didn't realise I'd sent a tape. I think it must have been a tape or something, and thought, well, you know, it'd be great if something came of it, but I didn't expect anything. And it was weeks and weeks had gone on, and it all happened eventually, and I thought, right, I'm going to have to go and move to the Midlands and stuff. So this is actually happening.
And here you are.
And here I am, yeah, still in the Midlands.
What about you, Rob, then? What was the first project that you worked on, and how did you get it?
I kind of dabbled with some educational software and wrote my own graphics utilities and wrote this stuff to teach people music. And that I thought it was going to be a big thing, and of course it didn't happen. So then I thought, well, I started looking at some of the Tasket games, and I thought, okay, maybe I've got to get into games. And I got involved writing a game, which the company went bust just as I was finishing the game. And, you know, I did all the graphics and all the music and everything, wrote all the code. And people thought the graphics were okay. They thought the game sucked, but they thought the music was cool. So I thought, well, hang on, maybe I should just concentrate on doing music, because at that time, you know, in the early 80s, some of the games, you know, had like all the right notes with all the wrong sounds and completely in the wrong place, and also out of tune. So I thought there's got to be an opening for somebody who can at least get the notes, at least 90% of them in the right place, you know. So I did some demos, and went through all the magazines, got all the addresses that I could find of every software house and every developer, and sent them a whole lot of stuff with the flyers and demos, and hoping that I would get a gig. Nothing happened. So I did that for about 6 months. Nothing happened. And then eventually somebody called up and said, I'd like you to do something. And I can't remember which one it was. I think it's probably one of the Mastertronics games. I think the earliest thing was probably Action Biker for Mastertronics, which was, I think, 100 quid, which was awesome at the time. Wow. Write a little tune and get 100 quid. Can't go wrong, can you?
Can't get better than that.
Doesn't get better than that, does it?
What's the kind of strangest method you've used to create a sound effect or an instrumental, or kind of a little cheat to create a noise?
I got all my team in once to make silly vocal noises, which I then pieced back together to make, I wouldn't say it's a very melodic, but sort of as a rhythm. I'm not saying that's the most the wackiest thing I've ever done, but it's the thing I can now remember. So I'd get them in one by one and just make something silly, and then I'd sample them all up and make a rhythm out of it. Whether it worked or not, who can say? But it was fun to do, and sort of things like that. I always try and think of something a little bit strange to put in a piece. I always have like a sound effect track to give it a little bit of flavour, I guess.
Are you often like listening around for what might make a good sound effect in life? Do you hear like
the classic thing of when you first buy a microphone, went around the house and recorded the things around the house, like the toilet flushing or scraping a bike wheel and stuff like that. And I've used that bike wheel in a lot of stuff, and slowing it down and stuff. It sounds like a weird piano or something, but it's kind of a otherworldly sound. So yeah, you gather these sounds, and over time they show up in pieces that you do and stuff like that.
It's a bit like Doctor Who when they use the piano strings.
Yeah, exactly.
What about you, Rob? Used any unusual methods for?
I used to do stuff before I did the C64. Okay, I had some gear at home, and I remember I used to get drunk quite frequently when I was young, and I remember just going around pubs stealing beer trays. And then I had about 6 or 7 beer trays, and I hung them up from the ceiling. And started bashing these things and recorded them. That's probably one of the weirdest things.
At like 4 a.m.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like when you're drunk and you start stealing police codes and things like that. You think, hang on, how did I get that?
So in terms of briefs that you get from developers when they're making a game, I mean, have you had any like memorable briefs? Are they any good? Do they give you direction, or any really weird ones maybe that stick in your mind?
I've had some unhelpful ones, definitely. I remember one Game Boy game. I asked the programmer, I said, well, what do you have in mind? He's like, good music. Like, right, okay, that's helpful. And I like Pink Floyd. It's the Game Boy, come on. So yeah, those are always helpful. Or I remember, it wasn't actually me, but a friend of mine was doing a fire level in Donkey Kong. So, it's a Donkey Kong game. You can picture the scene, and the designer said, so it was like a lava level. So he said, I know, I've got one. Brought tape in. It was Prodigy's Firestarter. Like, yeah, that's really suitable. Yeah. We'll go with that. So yeah, you get a lot of those sort of things. Usually, it's always the younger designers. It's always their favourite music. So can we put some punk and two-tone in? It's like, probably not. It's a baseball game, that kind of thing. So you just have to smile politely and then try and think of a brief yourself. Usually.
What about you, Rob? Any impossible missions that you've done, or any briefs that were a bit out there?
Yeah, loads actually. The thing that I'm talking about later on is Arcade Classics. I called the guy up, which was, before that it was called Big 4-Pack. I called the guy up, I said, what do you have in mind? And he's like, just do some Hendrix, man. Excuse me? Yeah, man. Hendrix, man. Okay. So that was
on the Commodore 64.
That was a bit of a challenge. And then the other thing that really just was awful was when I did a game called Populous, where you played God. I called up I was working for EA at the time. I called up the guy and he goes through this list of sound effects. And this is on a machine called a PC, which for games is short for piece of crap. Because audio-wise, it was just a nightmare. You had to support Covox, you had a Tandy 1000 version, you had like Adlib board, and you had this PC beep, right? So I calls the guy up and goes through this sound effect. He says, I'd like the sound effect of demented pygmies sitting by the campfire.
I'm imagining that now, yeah.
So I thought, well, that's going to be a hell of a challenge to do that with a little PC speaker that can either do a beep or not do a beep, you know. So I kind of just went through the list like the Marx Brothers with the clauses, you know. That one up, not that one, not that one, not that one. So yeah, that one stands out as demented pygmies.
So do you think video game music's a lot more credible now compared to when you started?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, it's a cliche, but up until, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, anyone you told that's what you did. Oh, you do the bleeps and bloops, and then you start doing a Game Boy tune or something. Which, yeah, okay, I did used to do that as well, but it had come along. It came a long way before people actually accepted it, and now it's kind of it's a sort of credible art form. And I mean, as we've seen now, people are actually re-releasing stuff on vinyl, which I find is incredible. That, you know,
even cassette.
Really?
Oh, yeah, cassette's getting popular.
Blimey.
What do you think, Rob? Do you think is it attitudes changed to video game music since you started?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What was it like in the early days?
In the early days, it was you had complete freedom about what you could do, and the stuff that was happening kind of went parallel to the demo scene culture that evolved during the 80s. So things got quite bizarre, and then eventually, as the games got more involved and got bigger, then the individuals kind of tended to lose control, because then you had to do something which was very commercial for the game. So, and then it became that the marketing and the production team were calling all the shots about what was required. So it changed a lot in that respect.
Well, David Wise has just joined us. Hello, David.
Hello. So this podcast, who is it going? Is it going out live, or is it being
no,
recorded?
we're just recording it at the moment.
Fine,
yeah.
Lovely, thank you.
So, I mean, it might be nice to get your answer on that. I mean, in terms of when you first started in video games versus today,
yes.
Do you think video game music's now become a more credible art form, and is it more respected by the general public?
It's certainly taken on a different angle, totally respected. It's quite a big thing now, isn't it? I was just saying to Alice that last year I went over to Magfest, and it's a big festival. It's called Music and Games Festival. 27,000 people turned up for that festival, and they're there just to celebrate games music. It's immense, and hopefully, all being well, I'm going back next year. So just to do a bit more stuff. It's just a great event. There's so many people there. Most of them are musicians. They'll just be jamming in the hallways, in the different stages. And at night they've got this huge concert hall which holds about 4,000 people, and the bands there, they'll play video game music through until about 2 or 3 in the morning at really loud volume, and people go mental for it. It's fantastic. So yes, it's definitely got a life of its own.
Well, let's talk about your most famous projects then, the thing you're most known for. What do you say it is, Graeme, and how did the story of that project start, and how did you approach the music of it?
Well, I'd like to say Time Splitters, but I have to say Goldeneye, because that's the one that people have heard of. And the story of that was, it was originally going to be a Super Nintendo game, But our team leader, Martin Hollis, said that he didn't want to do it on the Super Nintendo. He thought that by the time we actually got it finished, it'd be ready for the next platform, which was the N64. So the story of that music is pretty straightforward, really, because we had the license to the Bond theme, so it was like, go nuts, you know. It was such, I mean, that theme's got such a wealth of different parts that you can pick and choose for each piece of music we wrote for the game. That was, I wouldn't say it was easy, because we still had to squeeze it into the console, and you know, memory was always, it still is tight even today, because as the memory increases, the stuff you want to do expands as well. You always want to do more than you've got the capabilities of. But yeah, having that as a project to work on was just fantastic. I mean, it's in hindsight, it's easy to say, oh, we always knew it was going to be popular and knew it was going to do well, but really and truthfully, we didn't. We were so close to it, having worked on it for a couple of years, that we didn't have a clue when it came out if it was going to be any good at all, you know, or if people would like it. But luckily, they did.
I mean, the N64 was quite an interesting system for the time, because most other platforms had moved to CD audio then, but that was still cartridge based. So I guess that was a limitation, was it?
Oh, absolutely. Well, it was, but in other ways, it gave you some freedom as well, because you could do quite a lot with MIDI. You could, an example would be the Super Mario World on the SNES. When you get onto Yoshi and another channel comes into the tune, you've got that sort of woodblock sound. So you could do all that kind of thing with the N64. But yes, it would have been nice to have CD quality as well, but that was not to be.
Yeah, if I could just interject, on the N64, for us working at Rare, to have MIDI was a big jump, because before that we typed it in, so MIDI was a big thing. That gave us a lot of freedom. So we were still jumping up and down about actually having MIDI and being able to play the parts in, let alone CD audio, which was the next step. Everybody else was using it, but we were quite happy we got MIDI.
Yeah. What about you, Rob? What would you say is a game you're most known for then, and how did you approach making that audio?
The game that I'm most known for, I don't know. That's up to other people to say. Really, it's not up to me to say. Really, is it?
Let's talk about maybe International Karate. Now, it's obviously one that's often mentioned, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Well,
and that was like 15 minutes long on the Commodore 64.
The guys specifically asked for that. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. So can you do something like that? Okay. So I kind of used a bit of the feel of that, and then I expanded it, you know, and took it through various transformations. And 2005, I did an orchestral suite based on International Karate, where I developed all the themes and orchestrated the whole thing to get that played in Leipzig.
I mean, I guess that was actually quite a long soundtrack. Maybe it wasn't quite 15 minutes, but I remember a lot of games at the time on the C64 that had maybe a minute of music that would just loop.
Yeah.
But was that kind of something you had in mind, that it would have to be longer to keep close attention?
Yeah, because I always thought that, you know, if you just do a minute, it's going to just drive people nuts, you know. Parents are going to be throwing the computer and the kids out the window, you know. So it was right from the early days. I thought, you know, I can't just write like an A section, a B section, repeat A section twice, and that'll do. You have to write A section, B, C, D section to make it interesting and make it like at least, you know, 6 or 7 minutes before it loops, so that it, you know, you've got a fighting chance that it doesn't drive people nuts. That was the way I always thought about it. That's why some of these things ended up getting to be, you know, 12 and 13 minutes long, you know.
That's an achievement in 64K. I mean, how much kilobytes of memory did you normally have to work with?
Because I don't have any source code, because that's another long story. I reverse engineered a couple of SID files. I reverse engineered Sanction. The whole lot of that is like 3,500 bytes code and everything, you know.
Crazy, isn't it?
Crazy, you know. But I mean, I had projects where, like, there was a machine called Amstrad. What was it called? CPC.
Yeah.
where I think I had like 2,000 bytes for everything, you know. So that's another Marx Brothers thing. Here's a routine. Whoop, rip that out. Get rid of that.
I think a pixel on the screen takes more memory than that today.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What about you, David? The game you're most known for and the kind of story behind it?
Let me see. Probably the Donkey Kong Country series, I'd say. And the story behind it was, well, we live, not lived, we did there sometimes. Rare was next to Twycross Zoo, and there were lots of monkeys there. That's not the real story. But, Nintendo had invested heavily into Rare, and mainly due to the fact that we got this 3D rendering graphics going. So instead of looking like 2D sprites, it now looked like 3D sprites, and compared to everything else at the time, it looked quite magical, really. It looks as though you could almost take them out of the screen by comparison. And Nintendo invested lots of money into us, and we were going to do a game, and they decided that the fighting game and also one featuring monkeys were going to be the two games that we were working on. So Killer Instinct and Donkey Kong Country series. And that's really where me and Graeme come in, really.
Well, how did you approach making the music for the game?
I was quite nerdish about it, really. You know, so if you want to nerd out, we'd only got 64K, which 64K is tiny. You know, most small sounds are megabytes long these days. 64K, I can't stress how tiny 64K is. It's minuscule. So to actually get something like Killer Instinct or the DKC soundtrack on 64K of memory is quite a technical effort. And what I did, I borrowed the system from, it's called a Korg wave station. It uses lots of single cycle waveforms, and they go through. So if you want a filter sweep, you sample the keyboard at various different cutoff frequencies, just have a single cycle, and if you sweep them, suddenly you've got filter sweep on the SNES, and it's not supposed to be possible. And so it was that level of nerdish detail that I went into, and that's how I got the soundtrack to sound different from just using MIDI and sort of plonky tunes. We could actually have something that gave a bit of sonic detail into the sound.
Because that game really pushed the SNES, didn't it?
It did, yes, both graphically and probably from an audio point as well. And also having some decent programmers as well who could throw samples into the stack and off it again, and things that were above my head at the time. So yeah, having a few good programmers is essential when you've only got 64K of memory.
Well, Rob.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, 3,500 bytes and reverse engineering. That's kudos.
Well, let's talk about the British sound. I mean, do you think the sound of video games here in Britain over the years was different to what you might hear in Japan or America? Did it have a kind of unique approach?
Is there a defined sound?
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's a defined sound, really. I mean, you can spot a Japanese soundtrack. I mean, it's, you know, those Final Fantasy scores and stuff. You hear them and you know them. I don't know if there's a British, not to my ears anyway. I mean, we, like myself and Dave, when we were working at Rare, we just were doing what we were doing. We weren't trying to sort of match up to the next composer, really, because I mean that was the time before the internet. And it sounds ridiculous now, but you know, you didn't have that sort of connection to everything. You were very insular in what you were doing. I mean, the only other game music I would hear would be from the other guys in the music block. You might get snippets when you went to the testing block and played some of the game and stuff, but yeah, not to my. You'd know more than me, I think.
Well, so we were basically locked away in a farmhouse in the middle of the Leicestershire countryside, and as far as we knew, we were the only game composers in the world, and we were locked up there of our own volition, funnily enough, and we used to go there every day. But everything that was happening in the outside world, we had no idea. We were just really competing with each other just to try and get the edge over the next soundtrack. And
another composer, Grant Kirkhope, who I'm sure some of you have heard of, was in what used to be the Chicken Shed.
Yes.
When he first started.
I guess it must have made you quite innovative, though, because you had to do it all in-house and yourself then, I guess. You're not getting these outside kind of
Well, we had separate offices, and we were away from the teams as well, even. It was quite bizarre the way it kind of worked. So we'd have our own office, and we'd be there on our own all day, chipping away at chip music, really. very, very insular, very, yeah, it's not healthy, not from a mental health kind of perspective. But then, you know, between us, we managed to get a few good tunes out, and people still fortunately like to play them today.
Well, with you, Rob, I mean, you mentioned like the New Romantics kind of influence, and I know the Commodore 64 in particular was much, like, it was a very big machine in Europe, had success in America, but I think the demo scene and all that was very much a European thing.
Yeah,
I mean, were you aware of many other things happening outside of the UK at that time? Obviously pre-internet. And
there's always been a massive difference culturally and musically between the US and the UK. In the UK, everybody has, you know, has heard of Depeche Mode or somebody, you know. In America, you've got like 26 million different stations, and everybody listens to something completely different. It's just so diverse, you know. So in the late 80s, there was this whole cultural thing with the video game music, which was very kind of much more exploring and trying to be innovative. As soon as I go to the States, it's like hitting a brick wall. I've then got to, like, you know, turn all that off and listen to nothing but CBS and ABC and NBC, and basically do something so far on the middle of the road you couldn't deviate 2 millimeters, and you had to get used to that very, very quickly. And I don't think that the whole thing between American music and British music, I don't think that difference has ever changed.
Yeah, it's one of those things that always comes back down to the lowest common denominator if it's going to be appreciated by as many people as possible. And then trying to get some form of innovation into that as well is really our challenge.
So what project have you enjoyed making the most, like, out of all of the soundtracks?
It's going to be Time Splitters, because the Rain, I don't know if anyone's aware of it, it's a first-person shooter, but it's based in lots of different time zones and in space and jungles, all that kind of stuff.
It was a local game as well, wasn't it?
It was a local game for local people, which is just why we're not still making them. It's made in Nottingham at Free Radical. So there I could just go nuts, because no tune was the same, which is kind of what I enjoy. Got very low boredom thresholds and attention problems, so being able to like write music for an Aztec jungle one week and then you're in space in Mars the next week was fantastic. And it was also we didn't really at that point have any publishers leaning on you. It was IDOS, and they were very much like, oh, you guys, you can just, you know what you're doing, which was the first and last time that has ever happened. Now it's very, very much a stricter hold on what gets produced. So having that freedom was just lovely.
And also because of that, I don't know if anybody's played Time Splitters 2, but it is a phenomenal game, and I think it sort of left off where Goldeneye. That was our plan. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if anyone hasn't played it, dig it out and go and play it. It's a great game.
Whenever we go to retro gaming shows, like our friends come, they're on there, Time Splitters 2 all day on the arcade. Yeah, they queue up, they get to the end of the queue up again, go on it again. So 4 hours run it last time, wasn't
it? It's a really playable game.
Very addictive. What about you, Rob? Is there any projects that you worked on that really stick in your mind as being really enjoyable?
Probably the Sherlock Holmes 3DO project. One of the few opportunities where I could really get stuck in musically and branch out and do something a lot more classical, a bit more involved musically, exploring different aspects, adding a bit counterpoint and some of that stuff. That was so different from like the other stuff that I got pigeonholed at a year doing all the sports stuff. I got sick of trying to write sports themes.
Yeah. Where did you go with those?
Well, the 3DO was quite an interesting platform. So, I don't know if anyone remembers it, but it was a very expensive console, wasn't it? Really high end. I think it came out for about £600 in 1993.
Well, it was later than 93.
I thought it was around. It was pre-PlayStation, I think it was. Maybe 93, 94.
It was
it must have been around then. But it was...
What year was the PlayStation 1?
That came in 94 in Japan, I think.
Did it?
Yeah, so...
Well, maybe it was somewhere the three, yeah.
But it was a very groundbreaking machine, and was working on that system, did it feel like a big upgrade?
Yeah, because everything was that was one of the first projects that was going to be streaming audio from CD, so I wasn't stuck with MIDI or anything. It was digital audio. Yeah, it was. The whole concept of 3DO was basically ahead of its time, and it wasn't going to succeed, was it?
I mean, you look like the Xbox One and that today. They're kind of doing a similar kind of thing, aren't they? Like an all-in-one media kind of centre. And 20 years earlier, though.
Yeah.
So, what's the best soundtrack you kind of enjoyed working on?
I enjoy working on them all, to be honest. Everyone's a new experience because you've done the last one, and I'm sure Graeme and Rob are the same. That once you've done the soundtrack, you're so involved with it that when you can move on to the next thing, it's like a breath of fresh air. So they've all had technical challenges, and so I can't really put a favourite down. But yeah, I enjoy them all really.
Obviously, the handheld systems must have had like their own approach to making music for them. I mean, did you find that it was very different to work on those? Do you have to maybe go a bit back to roots when you were working on like the Game Boy systems, for example?
Game Boy, yeah, definitely. I mean, mobile nowadays, we're a bit luckier because we have a lot more memory and stuff like that. But I did work on a Game Boy Advance game, which sonically wasn't that advanced. That was again squeezing little sounds into no space, and it was a lot of work for quite little payoff, really. I don't mean financially. I just mean you spend all day on it and you listen back to it and think, still sounds bad. It's like, there's nothing you can do with a 10 kilohertz sample to make it sound any better sometimes. But yeah, it's all about approaching the music from a different aspect. If you know you've got those limitations, then you can write for that system and try and get the best out of it. It's when you're having to squeeze something that shouldn't fit into it that you come up with the problems, because you're not writing for its strengths then. Again, I'll be talking about that in about half an hour.
Did you find the same with it?
Oh, definitely. And again, the Game Boy Advance, it really should have been called the Game Boy Backward. It was a physical unit like that. I think it had one little tiny speaker on it, which meant it had no high end and it had no bass end. You only had mid-range, and everything was fighting for the mid-range. So you had to choose the sounds that you used very, very carefully. And it was only 8-bit, so it was definitely a step backwards from the Super NES. And there was no compression on it. It was an 8-bit sample, very noisy. So not only did you have no bass and no treble, you had a lot of noise as well in there. And as Graeme rightly said, there was very little reward for the amount of work that you had to put in. But that was the system, and you just got on with it and made the best of it.
Do you do much handheld work?
No,
systems?
nothing.
I guess it must have been a bit like, though, the methods that you probably would have used on the Commodore 64, I guess, would have been kind of 8-bit samples or 8-bit kind of sound chips and stuff, I guess. It would have been very much back to roots, which for the mid-90s must have been like you going back in time 10 years.
Yeah, a little bit. I enjoyed the Game Boy stuff, actually, because that was very much like writing for a chip. And you knew people would play, when people play a game, I'm talking the original Game Boy, when you play that, a Game Boy sounds like a Game Boy. So if you can do some tricks and stuff, you feel a bit good about yourself. But with the Advance, it was it was trying to do too much with too little processing power and too little memory.
How much polyphony did you have on that?
I can't even remember. I think we did. I think we had 8 channels or something. Yeah.
Yeah, so 8 channels, 8-bit, very little memory, and you had to share it with sound effects. So in real terms, you had 5 channels.
How much memory did you have then?
Peanuts, really. Just
if you got 8-bit samples, like no compression and 8 channels.
I just remember it being very small. It would have been probably 256k or something stupid like that. It was better than the Super NES for sample data.
Yeah.
But it just sounded a lot worse. Although you had more data to play with, the fact that you couldn't compress it meant you needed a lot more memory. And so even though you had, 8 times as much, you couldn't do 8 times as much with it.
Yeah.
Well, what was the most frustrating system to program on?
That one.
I'd say the SNES actually, because it was pre-MIDI, so typing everything in hex was frustrating, because if you got one note length wrong, then it would go out of sync with all the other channels, and then you'd be debugging like a coder, really, trying to find out where you've typed it wrong. It's like typing in a listing or something, back in the day. And so that was totally frustrating from a time spent point of view, because it would just take forever to get those notes in.
Yeah, for me it's definitely the Game Boy Advance, because it was, as you say, it was definitely the Game Boy backward, really, as far as sound goes, and it was very frustrating. I converted a game called DKC3 over to it, and I wrote a new score because I wrote it for the actual hardware, which was a lot easier than trying to take somebody else's score and convert it, which I'll probably still be working on it now. It would have been impossible. It just wouldn't convert, so it was easy to start again. But it was, very little reward for a lot of hard work, and it still sounded compromised at the end of it.
What about you, Rob? Any systems that you looked at and you thought, why am I working on this?
PC.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, with all the different, audio configurations that you had to support on the PC, and I developed a system with the music which was MIDI based, where I would convert the variable length timestamps into 60 hertz timestamps. So channel 16 would be for the little PC speaker, and then MIDI channels 13, 14 would be for the 3-voice Tandy, and then there'd be the ad-lib would make a selection from the Roland MT32. But then at the end of all that, you did all the music stuff. You then had a list of 30 odd sound effects that you suddenly had to try to do for all these different configurations, and it was just an extreme test in mental tenacity and strength to will yourself to get through it.
I mean, obviously, you guys are here today talking about these amazing game soundtracks that you've made over the years. I mean, does it kind of blow your mind a bit to think there's something you worked on maybe 20 years ago, people still love and they still want to talk about and hear about?
30 years ago.
Yeah, you look younger though, Rob. Does that kind of blow your mind though?
Yeah, very much so. It still amazes me that, it's great because people will write to you and say, I love that, and it meant so much to me, and etc., etc. But you don't think of it at the time. I don't. What I'm working on now, I don't think, I really hope that someone likes it in 10 years, because you're just engrossed in what you're doing. And there's been various misses as well as the hits, obviously. But yeah, it's fantastic. It sort of, I can prove to my parents that it was a real job after all.
What about you?
I thought when I started my talk, I was just showing a part of the Tokyo Philharmonic playing some of the DKC2 soundtrack that was originally composed 23 years ago or more. And it's nice that last year they put a concert together, all these different things, Final Fantasy, Donkey Kong. And it's just fantastic to see a huge orchestra. Somebody's taken the time to do an arrangement of your music, put it on. It sounds fantastic, and it's still got life 20 plus years later. It's very humbling, very good to see, and I'm very thankful it makes a great promo video as well. So,
I think with you, Robin, stuff like Project Hubbard, you kind of imagine that you'd be doing that 30 years after you first made those songs.
Oh, well, to be honest, when I first started, I actually thought that the whole thing was going to be just a little fad, fashion.
Or video games.
Yeah. I actually thought that these £1.99 games, the whole thing would be a fad, and I thought, enjoy it while you can. It's going to last maybe a year, and then these things are going to be in the bin. The C64s will be in the bin, and that'll be the end of it, and something else would have taken over. I had no idea that, 30 years down the line, that people would still be remembering a lot of this stuff, and that, I'm look on YouTube. Commando's got like 500,000 hits, for God's sake, 250 comments or something. It's insane. And I get people saying, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have done this, and it's kind of like very humbling and very flattering, and kind of like, makes you think in a retrospective way that it sort of validates all the effort that I put into this stuff back then, so
yeah.
What was the question?
Yeah, I think you answered it perfectly there, and I think it is testament to the hard work that you guys put in and the talent that you've had that people do remember all these years later.
And just to add to that, I first met Rob last year in Norway, and one of the nice things is that people invite you to all sorts of different places throughout the world to celebrate video game music, which I'm really thankful about. Norway's lovely, and then I got to go to Magfest and lots of other places. And
Magfest is in America, isn't it?
That's right. That's Washington DC, and then later on in the year I went down to Mexico. I went over to Ireland and lots of other places. So it's very nice to be invited, and I like travelling. I like seeing the world. So who knew that what we were doing 25 years ago was going to open up opportunities later on? But life's like that. It's you never know what's around the corner or what's going to come up later on. So I'm very thankful for, as Rob said, for putting all the effort in and the hard work, and I'm pleased people still enjoy it.
And we're pleased that you guys come and join us to talk about it.
Yeah, it's been good fun.
Yeah. Please go and have a round of applause.